Transportation Improvement Program. My name is Brian Slack. I am Principal Transportation Planner for the Ulster County Transportation Council. And tonight we are going to run through the draft update to the UCTC Federal Fiscal Years 23-27 Transportation Improvement Program, give you an overview of the process that's involved in developing it, as well as some of the projects. And if there are any questions from members online or audience members, we can address those at the end. The Ulster County Transportation Council is hosted by the Ulster County Planning Department here at the Ulster County government offices. We're the metropolitan planning organization for the Kingston urbanized area, as well as part of the Mid-Hudson Valley Transportation Management Area, which includes parts of Orange and Dutchess County as well. UCTC was established by an act of the governor of New York State in 2003. And we are responsible for the continuing, cooperative, and comprehensive transportation planning process that is established by an act of the United States Congress under the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1962. County executive serves as our chairperson, and the UCTC is a consensus-based decision-making body that is made up of highest elected officials from across Ulster County. Our meetings are held typically on the fourth Tuesday of every month, and they typically are held monthly at the Rosendale Town Hall at 10 a.m. And members of the public are always welcome to attend and will be given an opportunity for public comment at the beginning of meetings. And our next meeting will be held on the fourth Tuesday of July. MPOs are responsible for three primary planning and programming products. The most important of which is the long-range transportation plan. Our plan has a 20-year planning horizon and sets the goals that the MPO has for the transportation network in Ulster County. And from that plan, you have a unified planning work program, which lists the planning projects as well as task budgets and various types of activities that our staff members will be partaking in throughout the course of the year. And then you have the Transportation Improvement Program. And in conformance with our UCTC operating procedures, as well as federal requirements, we're holding this public meeting this evening to give you that overview. And this meeting presentation will also be posted on our YouTube station as well for future viewing. So the Transportation Improvement Program is a 5-year capital program for federally funded transportation projects. Those are projects sourced through the Federal Highway Administration and Federal Transit Administration. It's typically updated every 2 to 3 years. Last update was done in 2020. The TIP must be fiscally constrained, and I'll explain this a little further later on in the presentation. But it essentially means that we must have a direct relationship to specific federal allocations of funds for each project listed in the document. And of course, the TIP must be done in close coordination with New York State DOT, in our case, Region 8, and public transportation providers, in our case, Ulster County Area Transit. Then TIPs from across the state, once they're completed, are combined with the rural programs and compiled to create one state transportation improvement program. This graphic shows all of the 14 metropolitan planning organizations from across New York State. So as I was mentioning, the Transportation Improvement Program includes all federal highway and Federal Transit Administration funding programmed in Ulster County, as well as any state and local matches. The main components of our Transportation Improvement Program will be highway, bridge, and mobility projects, as well as transit projects that will be anticipated for implementation during the next 4 to 5 years, as well as New York State DOT Region 8 multi-county projects. And I'll review those in great detail in just a minute. Typically, we also include Thruway Authority and Bridge Authority projects, but We were given word this year that those projects will be 100% state funded in 2023. And as such, it is not necessary to list those projects in the Transportation Improvement Program. If that changes, those amendments will be made at a later point in time. So the process that we engage to update this document every 2 to 3 years, the New York State DOT circulates what they call fiscal targets, which is essentially a budget that we have to work with, as well as instructions for the process for updating it. And the instructions are typically the same year after year. Those were issued to us in March of 2022, and this year has been the tightest turnaround time period from issuance of the guidance to this point in time. The focus is always on the focus of the MPO's work, our staff work, is always looking at the existing locally sponsored federal highway and transit projects and programs, and working with those local sponsors, municipalities like Kingston, New Paltz, and Lloyd, and many others, and going over the budgets and schedules for existing projects. After we go through that process, updating those budgets and schedules, we provide recommendations to the UCTC Technical Committee. Those recommendations were delivered then to the Policy Committee in May of 2022. And from that point on, we began to then fine tune the program throughout the month of June. Essentially, the update of the TIP is a moving target. Things are constantly changing as we get new information on local projects. We update it as we move along. But as we move along that process, we narrow down the amount of changes we make, and it gets more and more accurate. We're on version 2 right now of the draft TIP, and we will be forwarding the final draft TIP to the Policy Committee within the next 10 days when the public comment period ends. So an important piece of information to mention is the recent passage in November of 2021 of the bipartisan infrastructure law. The law provides the basis for federal highway and federal transit administration programs and activities. It's a 5-year program, so it's active through September 30th, 2026. And this particular infrastructure law is considered to be a once-in-a-generation investment of over $350 billion in highway programs. And it also includes the largest dedicated bridge investment since the construction of the interstate system. So from the bipartisan infrastructure law, it's important to note that while there was a significant increase from the most recent infrastructure law, that increase was focused on 2 primary programs. The Supplemental Bridge Formula Program increased by 41%. And that's important for Ulster County. We have over 380 bridges in Ulster County administered from New York State DOT and Ulster County Department of Public Works, as well as local municipalities, and they will certainly be able to share in some of those funds. As well, the other program that was increased was the National Highway Performance Program, which focuses on the national highway system. That would include the interstate system, Route 28, basically the major highways that are needed to connect ports, terminals, transit facilities, fueling facilities, Army bases. Those are what constitute the national highway system, and that's administered entirely by New York State DOT in Ulster County. Balance of the additional growth in the transportation law is directed to new programs. These programs are typically discretionary, meaning local municipalities have the discretion to apply for them competitively. Some of them may be distributed by formula, meaning that the MPO or the Region 8 DOT will get an allocation by formula that they can spend according to the rules of the specific program. But the programs, there are many new ones. The main focus areas are carbon reduction, safety to decrease crashes on our roadways, resiliency to make our transportation system more able to withstand hazards from the natural environment, and enhancements, including improvements to our a non-motorized transportation system. 3 of these programs have already been announced. Some of these programs still do not have rules that have yet been drafted that would indicate how we would apply for funding and how much funding will be made available. So getting into the details of our transportation improvement program, the draft 23 iteration programs $103 million in federal funds for roads, bridges, maintenance, bicycle pedestrian transit projects in Ulster County over the 5-year period, as well as state and local matches of necessary roughly $25 million. For this TIP iteration, the local federal shares, also known as targets, were not adjusted based on the new New York State executive budget or the new bipartisan infrastructure funding levels. Therefore, and this is an important point, as what Dennis would indicate would be a headline, a major takeaway from the presentation. Local targets for the development of this transportation improvement program were held flat. There were no significant increases during this update. 100% of our fiscal target went to provide funding for projects that are already programmed on the transportation improvement program from the 2020 update. Roughly 62% of the bridge fiscal target that was provided to UCTC went to existing targets, which meant that we had remaining funds to program 1 new bridge added utilizing those savings. And that went to the Beaver Kill Bridge in Hardenberg. That is an Ulster County facility. And that project was actually applied for 2 years ago. So it's not actually a new project per se. This just happens to be the most convenient time period that we will be adding the project to the TIP, and it will use that allocation. Typically, when we do a TIP update, we look at the needs of the existing program, and if we have money left over, we will do a call for projects and offer our municipalities to provide proposals to spend any additional leftover funds on road, bridge, trail or non-motorized projects. Unfortunately, we didn't have that opportunity during this iteration. We hope to have that opportunity during the next iteration. The planning targets, as were provided to us, are located in Appendix C of the document. And you'll note here, this is just to highlight what we had to work with. We had 2 dedicated funding sources. These are federal funding sources that can be used to pay for the programs on our transportation improvement program. STBG Flex, which can be used primarily for highway projects. We had $7 million of roll-in, that's existing money programmed on the current TIP, plus an additional $5 million. We needed to use all those additional $5 million just to make ends meet for the existing program. And that was primarily due to some construction delays in design, right-of-way acquisition delays, and also significant costs, inflation. And then the STBG off-system bridge program, we received roughly 1.2 million annual allocation per year over the 5-year program, plus a roll-in of $439 million. There will be a small amount of remaining funds that will go unprogrammed into savings. It's roughly $600,000, if I'm not mistaken. And those funds will very likely, since they cannot fund a new bridge would cost much more than that. It will probably be used for cost overruns. So a good snapshot of the full UCTC state and local program is shown here. This is by the federal funding program. We have just over $37 million in federal highway funds programmed on projects. I will run through those projects shortly. And roughly $33 million in FTA funds. As I mentioned earlier, This is a somewhat of a moving target. And while we may not have programmed all of our federal transit administrative dollars on the current iteration of the TIP, we have estimated that we have available at least $33 million for use on the for designated recipients that can use Federal Transit Administration funds in Ulster County. Each UCTC TIP, all TIPs are required to have a project location map that can be found directly in the document with a corresponding table. So now to get into the distribution of projects that we have on our existing TIP, I'm going to show you the types of projects by project category. If you look at the highway system projects, there are three main categories those can be boiled down to. Mobility, which refers to projects that can improve mobility of pedestrians and cyclists, and also the safety of pedestrians and cyclists on our roadways. Bridge projects, which are self-explanatory, and then safety projects. So among the mobility projects that will be included on this TIP, Route 209 sidewalks in Kerhonkson will be scheduled for construction in 2023, construction obligation. The D&H Rail Trail in Wawarsing, a small segment of that rail trail, is scheduled for construction in 24. Flatbush and Foxhole sidewalks in the city of Kingston, that is an enhancement project to do sidewalks, new sidewalks along those two roadway segments, including improved crossing facilities at the CSX Railroad crossing. Highland Streetscape project is a connectivity project to connect local streets to the Hudson Valley Rail Trail in Highland. Henry W. Du Bois is an improvement to mobility in that town of New Paltz and village of New Paltz roadway, and that is part of the Empire State Trail. Route 28 path in Onteora will provide an off-road protected pedestrian multi-use paved path to connect from the Central School District to the Ashokan Rail Trail. And then County Route 7 and 8, which is a significant roadway shoulder widening project in the towns of New Paltz and Gardner that is being conducted by Ulster County Department of Public Works. And the funding total is shown in the scale bar to the left. Among the bridge projects, Route 213, Tongors in Ulster County, most of these are Ulster County Department of Public Works projects. We also have the Clinton Avenue Bridge in Ellenville, the Boyce Mill Bridge in Rochester, and Route 212 in Woodstock is receiving a significant amount of funding for, I believe, 3 bridges on Route 212 in Woodstock, and that project is being administered by the New York State Department of Transportation. I would say at least 1/3 of that over $20 million share in bridge funding is going to the Route 212 project. Then finally, we do have one safety project, an important one that's programmed for the intersection of Route 44 and 55 at Brunswick Road in the town of Gardner. That is a signal installation project. We expect that project to be moving forward. It is in design right now, moving forward, I believe, next federal fiscal year. Going on to the transit program, I just want to give a brief overview. As I mentioned, we have available to us at least 33 million. I say at least because just as recently as Monday on our desks at the UCTC, we received notice of additional funding being released and allocated to the Kingston urbanized area. So that will be made available also to our transit system. And I'll talk about some of the projects that our transit agency will be programming in just a moment. The majority of funds, $68.8 million programmed for expenditure within Ulster County, is from the Department of Transportation. That's $68.8 million across 3 federal funding categories. And those categories are shown there. The types of activities that these funding categories will go to are essentially referred to as where and when activities. So that includes things like safety improvements, even safety studies and crash analyses, landscaping, guide rail, bridge washing, a lot of routine maintenance, geotechnical support if you have slope failure or and water on the roadway, bridge and pavement maintenance, stormwater culverts, sidewalk improvements, including ADA accessibility, signal upgrades, and also sign and structures. So there's a very significant amount of money that is required just to maintain the local system that New York State DOT is responsible for, but it also will include funding for specific projects. Those projects, however, have not been announced at this time in many instances and are announced at a later point in time. That's why it's usually lumped in to these broad categories. So what this all leads to is the development of a fiscal constraint table. This is the primary requirement of a transportation improvement program. It shows essentially how UCTC stays within its constraints of the funding that is provided to us by formula through central office in Albany and working closely with Region 8, New York State DOT. And the table shown here shows all of the funding categories and the total amount of dollars per category programmed per year by UCTC, as well as by the New York State DOT. So it is proof to our friends at the Federal Highway and Federal Transit Administration that we have presented a fiscally constrained tip and lived within our means, essentially. Another requirement of tips is to include a listing of major accomplishments during from previous iterations. And we're very pleased to be including these accomplishments and highlight some of them in detail. And also on table 1, a full listing of the accomplishments is shown there. By quick calculation, I tabulated that we had over $135 million in FHWA funds were obligated during the previous TIP development period. A significant amount of that was for the Ward Street Bridge. I believe it's somewhere in the vicinity of $40 million in funding was allocated for the Ward Street Bridge, but it's also quite a few local projects that I'm happy to highlight right now. Obviously, the I-587 in Kingston was a major accomplishment. That was a $12 million project. Ulster County Planning Department was the sponsor of the Midtown Linear Park, which is very near construction. The picture here is very dated because it shows a gravel path, but this is a now fully paved asphalt path connecting Midtown Kingston to Kingston Plaza. Ward Street Bridge, as I mentioned, which is currently under construction. That's a 2-year project. The Broadway Streetscape project, which added improved lighting, signalization, stormwater, green infrastructure, as well as a 8-foot 2-way cycle track. A significant accomplishment shown here is the bridge on Route 28 in the hamlet of Mount Tremper, which was a resiliency project sponsored by the New York State DOT. This bridge was raised roughly 10 feet in height and lengthened, I believe, nearly 500 feet in length in order to accommodate a much larger floodway on the Esopus Creek and to prevent closures in the future during future likely catastrophic flooding events. And I did also want to highlight a significant acquisition by our transit provider, Ulster County Area Transit. Shown here is one of 3 battery electric buses. It's a 35-foot bus manufactured by New Flyer that we took acquisition of in the fall of 2021. Now, these buses were acquired utilizing Volkswagen settlement funds, which actually are not federal funds. So this project never would have shown up on the tip. However, going forward, UCAT, working closely, obviously, with the county executive, Patrick Ryan, has committed to full electrification within roughly a 10-year period. And on the Transportation Improvement Program project listing, you will see new additional purchases of additional expansion of the EV fleet for UCAT for at least 2 additional 35-foot buses, as well as fleet vehicles to provide paratransit service throughout Ulster County. And we will very likely be adding additional projects in the near future as we amend the program. So in conclusion, the Transportation Improvement Program is developed over a period of weeks with a lot of collaboration between the New York State DOT, our transit providers, and our local sponsors, and of course, our members of the Transportation Council. And we appreciate everyone's assistance in the development of that program, as well as UCTC staff. So our benchmarks, June 28th, we presented the draft program to the technical committee. On July 7th, we did our public announcement, and 15-day public comment period has begun. I'll provide instructions for submitting public comments. Tonight is our public meeting requirement. On July 21st, that's a 15-day public comment period, will close. And then on July 26th, which is the fourth Tuesday at 10 a.m., we will request the UCTC Policy Committee to provide final approval of this Transportation Improvement Program draft program. The TIP will become official at some point during the next federal fiscal year. We're actually awaiting further instructions because of the late release of the bipartisan infrastructure law and some issues with conformity, air quality conformity in the New York metropolitan area. We're pushing back the adoption of the STIP to, I believe it's going to be November, but it will be in early federal fiscal year 23. This TIP will become effective. If you have questions, we're happy to open up the floor to questions from attendees. And at any time, you can contact members of the Transportation Council, all of whom are in attendance this evening. Dennis Doyle, our Executive Director of the Planning Department and of the Transportation Council, myself, Brian Slack, and David Stoss, our Senior Transportation Planner, Data Coordinator, and Safety Guru. So comments on the UCTC TIP can be emailed to the email address shown on the screen. They can be submitted by writing as well if you prefer to use the written word to pen to paper. And in conclusion, the documents shown here tonight are all available for download through the following URLs. That concludes our presentation. I can now open the floor up to any comments or questions from members in the audience or online. Welcome to our late attendees. Thank you for coming. Anybody online? So with that, I think we're going to conclude this evening's session. Thank you very much to everyone for coming out on this stormy evening in July. We appreciate your time, and we look forward to hearing your comments on the TIP. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.